In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. May He shower His praise and endless blessings upon His noblest and most beloved Prophet Muhammad, His purified progeny, and chosen companions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. I would like to refer you to Channels TV, please. Channels TV has a program called Lunchtime Politics. Now, in its edition of 2 days ago, Channels TV featured part of a speech that was delivered by one-time central bank governor and present EMIR of KANO, MUHAMMADU SANUSI II. I think the function he attended was like the 3rd annual Treasury conference in Government House KANO. Now, in that speech, which he presented at the invitation of the organizers of the conference, he aired his views regarding the issue of poverty in Nigeria. He referred the conference to another speech that was presented by Bill Gates at the United Nations General Assembly last year, in which Bill Gates, according to the EMIR, projected or predicted that by 2015, if some measures are not taken, by 2050, 80% of the poorest people in the world would be in Africa, and that half of those would be in Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, immediately after that introduction, in which he referred to the speech by Bill Gates, he started talking about subsidies. That is, subsidies on petroleum products and electricity. And he said so long as the subsidies on petroleum products and electricity are not lifted, are not stopped by the federal government, poverty will continue to persist in Nigeria. Now, I don't know how he was able to establish a connection, a direct proportion between subsidies on petroleum products and electricity and poverty. I don't know how he reached the conclusion that the only culprit that is responsible for poverty in Nigeria is subsidies. I am not an advocate for subsidies, really, and I do not support subsidies wholeheartedly or wholesale. I'll prefer my suggestions, inshallah, regarding subsidies, maybe at the tail end of this presentation. I'm not saying I'm an advocate for subsidies, but what I'm saying is it is baffling how the EMIR was able to, from the speech of Bill Gates, was able to establish a connection, right, between subsidies and poverty in Nigeria, as if subsidies are the only reason why there is poverty in Nigeria. Now, of course, he brought some statistics. He was saying when he was governor of Central Bank in 2011, he witnessed it firsthand, whereby Nigeria earned about $16 billion from the sale of petroleum products, from the sale of crude oil maybe. But then at the same time, it spent $8 billion importing petroleum, and then it also spent $8.2 billion in the same year subsidizing the petroleum it was importing. It imported into the country. Therefore, 100% of whatever accrued to Nigeria through the sale of petroleum, through the sale of crude oil, was spent on importing petroleum. And that was the basis of his argument that subsidies is the only culprit responsible for poverty in Nigeria. Now, as far as I am concerned, before giving my opinion or suggestion regarding the issue of subsidy as a whole, I'd like to first of all say that this approach by the EMIR, His Royal Highness MUHAMMADU SANUSI II, has a name. It has a name that it is given. The name is capitalism. This is the capitalist approach. The capitalists will always want to bail out what they call Wall Street as opposed to Main Street. It is the capitalist always, exerts pressure on the citizens. The capitalist does not want any welfare programs for citizens in whatever country in the world. It is not particularly restricted to Nigeria. This is the way the capitalists think. They always think about privatization. They always think about themselves, the financial institutions, stuff like that. They don't think about the citizens. And that was what His Royal Highness did actually when he was a governor of the central bank between 2009 and 2014 or thereabouts. If you remember very well, at the time he was governor, he bailed out about 8 banks that were about to collapse. He bailed them out by recapitalizing them. He recapitalized banks. Now, recapitalization, simply put, is just a process whereby you inject fresh funds into some financial institutions, in this case banks in Nigeria, in order to shore them up and make them capable of normal banking transactions like borrowing and lending. Now, these banks were recapitalized no thanks to reckless policies by the captains of the banks and politicians and other people in that bracket. Now, of course, at the time he recapitalized those banks, he did something that was good and which we should actually acknowledge. And that is to say that he tried as much as possible to save the deposits of depositors. But basically what he did, the most fundamental thing he did was that he recapitalized those banks. He recapitalized them to the tune of about 620 billion naira at the time. And then he established a sinking fund of about 50 billion naira. You can refer to history. I don't have time to talk to at length on this particular point because it is well documented in history. You can refer to history and then you can verify what I am claiming now. So he recapitalized banks to the tune of 620 billion naira. And I would like to hope that in the process he did not end up recapitalizing himself also. Now, this is what happens in all capitalist settings. If you remember, during the time of President Obama, that was what he did too. President Obama did not actually cause the Great Depression in the United States of America. It was George Bush, the 43rd, George Bush Jr., that actually contributed in causing the Great Depression in the United States of America around 2008. But when Obama became the president, the 44th president of the United States of America, if you remember very well, instead of him he came in as a populist president. He came in with a change agenda. His slogan was, "Yes, we can." And then he was famous for saying that change doesn't come from Washington. Change comes to Washington. So it was like he went to Washington to change Washington. But at the end of the day, it was Washington that actually changed President Obama. So that instead of becoming the people's president, he became the president of the financial institutions. He bailed out Wall Street instead of bailing out Main Street. Right? Obama actually recapitalized the financial institutions of the United States to the tune of about $800 billion. Now, the 620 billion naira, with which the then governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria recapitalized the banks, was only equivalent to about $4.2 billion at the time. But Barack Obama actually recapitalized his own financial institutions to the tune of not $4 billion, but $800 billion. It was a staggering amount of money, right? They were just printing the dollars. They were just printing money they didn't have actually. So it was the same thing. Instead of Obama to bail out the taxpayer, he bailed out the financial institutions and the CEOs of those financial institutions. This is capitalism, right? Now, at the time, so many houses were foreclosed because the borrowers, the mortgagers, actually couldn't do anything but default on the mortgages, on the loans, right? So the houses had to be foreclosed because those houses were actually acquired or they were borrowed from the banks, who in turn bought the houses from the original owners. So when the borrowers were not able to fulfill their pledges with respect to the installmental payment of the loans that they received from the banks, it became the banks, from the point of view of the capitalist perspective, the banks couldn't do anything but actually seize those houses from the borrowers, so that they closed the houses, and that is what is meant by the foreclosures. The houses were closed such that people who were sleeping in houses before now started sleeping on streets. That is how brutal, how cruel, and how merciless capitalism can be. Right? Now, while Obama was busy bailing out those financial institutions to the tune of about $80 billion, $50 billion, so many billions of dollars, the CEOs of the same financial institutions were actually flying in chartered in private jets. Even when they were invited to Washington actually to come and explain how those banks and the financial institutions got into the trouble that they got into, they were actually flying into Washington with jets, right? So that is capitalism for you. I can refer you to some of the things that happened in that period from 2009, I think. Now, you can see how the the chief executive officers of those institutions that were bailed by Obama were actually continuing their financial recklessness. I will give you one or two examples. I'll give you one or two examples, just like I said. There was this particular person who actually went on vacation at a resort with the money that was used to actually bail out his own financial institution. I'm waiting for the prompt. Yeah, I've seen it. Now, it says Tesla CEO takes private jet as company takes public loan. The CEO of Tesla Motors, which has received a fat federal loan, flew to Washington, D.C. aboard a private jet at least 12 times in the past 14 months. Although it isn't unusual for CEOs to jet around on corporate planes, Elon Musk did so not long after lawmakers berated the heads of the big three automakers for doing the same thing while seeking a government bailout. You see, it says Musk flew to Washington aboard his Dassault Falcon 900 on June 15, 2009, 1 week before the Department of Energy agreed to lend the company $465 million to help build the Model S sedan, and 2 weeks after Tesla took over paying the plane's operating costs. Those costs came to $175,000 in the second half of last year, according to the paperwork Tesla filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission ahead of an impending IPO. Now, there are so many other cases like this, where you find them enjoying themselves, using taxpayers' money. And a lot of these institutions were actually built out by Barack Obama because in their own psyche, they felt that the institutions were too big to fail, right? Too big to fail. Like Goldman Sachs, Fannie Mae, right? JP Morgan, that is Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan Chase, and other institutions like the General Motors and stuff like that. Now, this was what happened in the United States of America, and this is also what happens here in Nigeria, in any capitalist economy that you can think of. So it is very, very suspicious, really, how the Emir of KANO actually established that link between poverty and subsidies. Now, instead of him to actually go to the root causes of the subsidies, he decided to forego that, right, and just look at what is happening as a result of the subsidies, which I will discuss, inshallah, God permitting, in the course of this discussion. Now, like I told you, this is what normally happens I'm just trying to look for, yeah, the list of companies that were built out by Barack Obama at the time. I think I've found, it is a very, very long list. I don't want to read the whole of it. I'll just give you an example of, you had companies like I was telling you, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, AIG, Bank of America, Citigroup, JP Morgan, Chase. All of these were actually built out to the tune of billions of dollars, really. This Fannie Mae, it was $119 billion. This Freddie Mac, it was like $71 billion. AIG, it was $67 billion, and so on and so forth. Money was printed and just given out to them, and they did whatever they wanted to do with it, while the citizens kept on suffering. Now, this is what happened in Nigeria also when the current emir of KANO was the governor of the central bank. He actually bailed out those financial institutions. He bailed out the banks.